You guys doing good? Feeling good? All right, sweet. You doing okay? Okay. Good deal. All right. If we haven't met, I'm Coleton, youth pastor. Thankful to be here. I've been here 5 years, y'all. I had hair when I started. Let's go. Thanks. One person. We all watched it happen. Oh, man. All right. When I got here 5 years ago, I preached a very similar series to what we're doing right now, and it did not land well. It did not go well, and I was like, one day we're going to do this series again, and it's going to matter and mean something. And so this is that year. This is that time, but it's called In Our Time based on Habakkuk 3:2 that says, Lord, this prophet crying out, I have heard of your fame. I've heard of your famous deeds, splitting the Red Sea, fire from heaven, driving out nations. I've heard of the amazing power that you have, but I'm not seeing it in my time. Would you repeat it in my day, in my time? Would you make it known again? And he's crying out for those things. And to me, that has been my heart cry for ministry and for God's power to break out for a number of years. And so coming here and going, man, especially in the South, there's just this sleepiness that happens inside the church where we don't expect God to do a ton. We just think it's a Wednesday thing, it's a youth group thing, it's a Sunday thing. God is there somewhere. He's out there. He's not really close. I don't really experience and encounter his voice. I don't really encounter his presence. I don't really encounter any of that. Nor do I expect his power to break in and actually change things in my life. When I pray, I expect my prayers to be things that I just said, but doesn't actually change anything. And that's just not true. That is just not the way that the Bible actually tells you to believe, and that's just not true for the church. And if that's your experience, you're experiencing something. You're just not experiencing following Jesus. I promise you there's more to it than that. And so if you're bored with Christianity, it's not because Jesus is boring. It's because whatever you've claimed to believe, whatever you're experiencing may be a little boring. But I promise you there's wonder and there's awe. There's something that has established this text that we read, this Bible that we read, that establishes it for generation after generation after generation. There's a reason that Jesus is the most famous person who ever lived, died, and rose again. There's a reason, because he's not boring. There's power there. And I want you to understand that, and I think Habakkuk cries out for it, and so are we. Lord, repeat it in our time. And so we've been looking at that vision for us, a ministry of students that are students of Jesus for their whole lives, not just from 6th to 12th grade, but students of Jesus for their entire lives, following him and experiencing the famous deeds of God repeated in their day, in their hearts, and their lives, and out among them, and things like that. And so that's what we want for you. As a ministry, that's what we're chasing down. That's what we want you to experience. And then what we've been looking at are these cultures. We call them cultures. It's really just like, what does your ministry feel like? What's it about? What are the things that you do? What can I expect in some of those things? And so we've been looking at what we're building our ministry upon. So we looked at the gospel, we looked at belonging, and we looked at pursuing Jesus. The way to experience Jesus is to pursue him. You know who experienced most of the things that Jesus did? Those who were close to him. It makes sense. Proximity matters. And so pursuing him matters. And so this week, we're actually doing two because they kind of go hand in hand, but we're looking at the culture of a blessing and innovation, or as Hannah Rhodes likes to say it, as pioneers, a culture of pioneers of blessing, just charting new courses in the way to bless the world. And I love what Hannah Nall read earlier about that promise that like we're called to be people who bless the nations, and all the nations will be blessed through us. It was actually a promise given for Jesus, and now it's given to us because of what Jesus has done. And now because Jesus lives in us by his Spirit, we are now the people that God wants to use to bless all of the world. And so it's based on that. And so what I want to look at is actually something that Jesus said for us in this idea of like, how can we bless the nations? What does Jesus say to this? Because he takes this, and in his first teaching, or his first sermon, he actually talks about this, and I had y'all read it on Sundays, but he talks about this idea of like, I want you to go and bless the world. And here's what he says. He says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. This is the word of the Lord. I've shared this story before, but only once. Sometimes I repeat stories. Some of you may have heard this story. If you're in 6th grade, you probably haven't. But I heard the story of a church in Las Vegas. that was doing ministry with sex trafficking people in the sex trafficking world, prostitutes. Jesus hung out with prostitutes, and so the church felt like we should also spend time ministering to people in those realms and things like that. And so what they did was they would go into these areas of town and that were really, really bad areas and talk with these women who were in this particular trade and try and help them and minister to them and bless them and support them financially and do whatever to find them another job, to get them out under the people that were kind of oppressing them and making them stay in these particular things. And they had a lot of success actually moving in. Believe it or not, a lot of prostitutes don't want to do that. And so they were moving into this space and actually helping them get out of that and so that they can make money in different ways. And one of them had a friend, one of the prostitutes that came out of that and was now a follower of Jesus and experiencing life in a very different way, had a friend that the church was trying to reach out to, and she just didn't want any of it. Like the lady was like, I don't want any of this. This is who I am. This is what I do. Like, no, I don't want any of your help, church. I don't believe in any of that stuff. And had clearly been mostly abused by the church and talked down upon and judged because of her work and all the rest of it. And so this church continually talked to the friend, trying to figure out how can we help this woman. This work is actively crushing her and killing her soul, and it's abusing her body. How can we help her? And so the woman was like, her birthday's coming up. And so the church was like, let's throw her a surprise birthday party. And so you set it up, do this thing, but we'll throw a surprise birthday party. And the woman's like, that's fine. It'll have to be like 2 or 3 in the morning. That's when she gets off work, from what she does. Like, it'll have to be really, and they're like, that's fine, whatever. But went and rented out this restaurant that the woman really, really loved that never got to eat at. And so the friend brings the prostitute, brings the woman to the restaurant at 3 in the morning, and she's like, this is definitely going to be closed. But all of a sudden it's open, and when she opens the door, this woman hears and sees all these people shout surprise and happy birthday, and they begin singing happy birthday to her. They have presents for her, and they're celebrating her. They want to hear her life story and all this stuff. And it was like this thing that like her hardened heart, where she didn't want anything from the church, it just melted her hardened heart and became very soft. And she was loved by these people. And one of the things that she said that stood out to her the most was like, no one has sung over me. No one has sung to me in years. Like, no one has sung anything to me. And so even happy birthday, which is such a random, it's like, happy birthday to you. But like, no one has sung to me. Everybody has used me for so many years. And this was like such a different experience for me. No one has loved me and done something for me. They've always been asking and requesting something of me, using me as a piece of meat rather than actually seeking to bless me. And it drastically, just this act of like a surprise birthday party where they gave her a couple of gifts, remembered her birthday, and went out of their way to do some of those things. It just transformed her heart, and it softened her to where she was able to hear about Jesus and wanted to learn more, because it's like, y'all have loved me so well and pieced my heart back together that now I want to understand. And they did. They were like, this is how Jesus sees you. She's like, I think Jesus hates me. It's like, he loves you. He is rejoicing over you with singing now. Like, he desires you. He loves you. I just want you to know that. And it radically transformed this woman's life. I love that story, because that's what a culture of that church is practicing, a culture of blessing, moving into the world, into spaces that aren't experiencing blessing, spaces that are experiencing death. Moving into the world and going, there's death here, but we can breathe life into this because we have the spirit of life in us, and we can love these people back to wholeness, and we can tell them that you are actually worth something, not because of your work or because of what you look like or what you do, but you're worth something because Jesus has died for you and has become your friend and wants to be your friend and love you and all the rest of it, and like all these different things. It's a really, really beautiful thing. And so that's what a culture of blessing looks like, and that's what we desire. And that's what Jesus is getting at here when he says, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. This church is actively living those things out. And I want to explain that really fast, because we don't use these particular things, but this church is being salt of the earth and being light to the world, to this particular woman. And so what Jesus meant, salt of the earth, there wasn't something called salt of the earth back then, okay? That wasn't a thing. But what there was this, salt of the meat. Salt of the meat was a thing. This is an ancient practice that developed long before Jesus' lifetime on earth. But what they would do is they would take salt and they would salt the meat, because they didn't have refrigeration. They didn't have like ice and like a Kenmore at their space or whatever. They like a Whirlpool fridge or something like that. They didn't have any of that. And so they'd like sit there and they'd like stack it with salt and stuff like that. And what it would do is it would keep the moisture away, and they could keep the moisture away, which kept the bacteria away. And so basically, salting the meat ultimately led to a lack of decay in the meat. So it kept life the lifetime of the meat when you could still eat it. It made it longer. It helped it experience more life instead of actually decaying and rotting and become ridden with disease and all the rest of it. And so what he's saying, what Jesus is saying to us, he's like, followers of Jesus we're the salt of the earth. We're not just doing this for meat. Go to the next slide. We're the salt of the earth. Followers of Jesus can bring restoration to people and bring life into areas where they're experiencing death. They can bring hope to the hopeless, joy to the discouraged, and love to those who feel unlovable. You're the salt of the earth, not just of meat, but you're actually the salt of the earth. The decaying process that sin is doing and the destructive process that sin is doing in the world and in people around you, he's like, you can actually reverse that. And you can be a restorative agent in their life, ultimately to take away the decay, to take away the death that they're experiencing and infuse them with life. You are the salt of the earth. And this church does that. This woman is actively actually being killed by the abuse that she's experiencing. This woman is actively having her soul and her mind destroyed based on how she's being treated and all the rest of it. And they breathe life into this woman, and they turn the clock back on what she actually thinks about herself. They were the salt of the earth to this woman, just taking the decay and the destruction and actually breathing life into it and changing the future of this woman. And then Jesus says, we're the light of the world. It's different back then. No light switches and all the rest of it, nothing like that. No lighters, none of that, none of those things. But what they did have, they had lamps, torches and lamps and things like that. And Jesus is saying that we're the light of the world. Followers of Jesus reveal a way of life that is available to others. If like the city on the hill that cannot be hidden, this idea is like this is a guiding point. We put the light up there, you can see the city, and so you know where to go. Think of a lighthouse that actually helps with the light in order for the boats to see and stuff like that. It's that idea. It's like it's a guiding way for you, not only in your house, because he says that in your house, but also outside, so that people can see where they're supposed to go. And so when Jesus says we're the light of the world, he's saying followers of Jesus have the opportunity to reveal a way of life that leads to life. In a world that's constantly choosing sin and something else and constantly searching for things to fill us and give us life, Jesus is like, you are the people who can live in such a way that display it to the world. You don't have to say it. Light never says anything to darkness. It's not like, hey, go away. Like light doesn't speak. It just makes it go away because it's there. And so in the same way, light of the world, you have the opportunity to just be around people so that your life actually beckons them to see something that's available to them that they didn't know otherwise because they're spiritually blind and can't see it. And again, this church was going to this woman and saying, I promise you Jesus is greater. There's something for you. And she didn't want any of it. But then in this moment of just blessing her with the blessings that they've received, Jesus has lavished us with love, and they just wanted to lavish her with love. And it showed to her and revealed to her a love that she hadn't experienced from anybody for a very, very, very long time, maybe ever. Just light to the world to this woman that ultimately guided her out of her darkness and out of her destructive life into something far greater, into redemption for the rest of eternity, but also life in the current experience. And so Jesus is saying this of you as well. Yes, we're to be a blessing to the nations, but the way that we do that is by being salt of the earth, salt to the earth and light to the world, turning back the process of decay, adding restoration into people's lives and going and showing them something better that exists versus actually having them just experience their normal, routine, day-to-day thing where they're constantly just struggling. Jesus is like, I just have something for you that I want you to experience. This is not something you'll have to chase down. My followers will be salt to the earth. They will do this. It'll be something that's available to them because they know me. They will be light to the world. They don't have to try and do that. It will just be something that exists in them because I exist in them. This is something that's about them. This is what they're for. And so that's what we long for. When we talk about what is a culture of blessing, we don't just want to constantly give you guys gifts, although that's fun to do. We really enjoy that because we love a culture of blessing. I like giving random gifts to people who say like, I don't deserve this. It's like, great. Neither did I deserve my redemption or the grace or the freedom of sin and all that. I didn't deserve any of that stuff, but Jesus gave it to me because he's a gift giver, and so are we. And so in the same way for you guys, what we want if you're a follower of Jesus in the room, we want you to understand this is your purpose. This is what you were made for, ultimately to glorify him by moving into the world as salt and light to other people. And so what we want for you is this culture of blessing to take root in your heart so that when you step into your schools, into your colleges, into your teams, your sports, whatever it is, that you are able to look around and see people who are struggling with the decay of life and actually move into their world and go, believe it or not, I can turn the clock back on this and you don't have to experience that anymore. That we have the opportunity to actually press in this particular way. And so that's the culture of blessing. The innovation piece is how we do it. Culture of blessing is this is what you're called to, but innovation is how we actually go about it. If you notice, Jesus doesn't say, be salt to the earth, and here's how. He doesn't give you there's 3 ways to be salt to the earth. Here's exactly how you do it. It's not rote. He doesn't say, here's light to the world, and here's all the ways that you can be light. You can't be light this way. You can only be light this way. He doesn't do that. It's very open-ended, and the reason is because he's like, you are different than you, and you have a different personality than you, and so on and so forth. He's like, salt to the earth, light to the world, but listen, you can do this in so many different ways because your personalities are so different. And when the Holy Spirit animates your personality in such a way that you're able to move into your context and be salt and light, he's like, why would I try and slow you down about how kind you are and the way that you prove your kindness and how you do that and show me to other people? There's tons of ways to do it. The innovation piece of our ministry is figure out how you can chart a new course to bring salt and light in the lives of other people. Figure out, and I love Hannah Rhodes' idea of this as well, be a pioneer of blessing. Start something brand new to bless other people. Something that I don't think anybody's ever thought about this. Great. You are uniquely gifted and called to a certain area of your life, and all of you know that because all of you don't play the same sport, all of you don't wear the same clothes, all of you don't do the same things. You're uniquely gifted for your specific time and space now that God has placed you in order to be a blessing to the world. And so innovation is something I want you to figure out. Figure out who you are, and we're going to get to that in just a second. So how do we do this? This is the culture of innovation. I have 2 that are anybody can do these things, okay? 2 of them, it's just free and open to anybody, although you'll find your own expression in this. But 1, how do we be salt and light? How do we bless those around us? The first one, again, super easy. Make someone's day. Just look around and go, how can I make their day? In a good way. Don't make their day horrible. Don't do that. But in a good way. Just looking around and be like, just find one person. How can I make their day? The other day I was at the gym and I was just putting up weights that I was using. And believe it or not, nobody does this at the gym. It's actually really annoying. But I was putting up my weights because I'm trying to leave it better than I found it and all the rest of it. And then there was another guy that left his weights. And so I was like, I can make his day. And so I just helped him put the weights. And sometimes gym guys get really mad about that. Like, hey, man, I was going to do that. I'm like, just trying to be nice. And I'm bigger than you, so leave me alone. Just kidding. But one of those things was like, man, this was a space. And he was like, he was so thankful. And then the worker, who normally has to track behind everybody and do all this stuff, comes up to me out of the blue and was like, hey, man, thanks for putting up your weights and that other guy's weights. And I was like, we're cool. You're welcome. Whatever, this is great. But to him, it was like, people don't do this. And it was just a small little thing of making someone's day. You can do this in some way. A couple of ways. 1, you can say kind things to people. It sounds super simple because it is. You can just walk up to random strangers, and instead of flipping them off or cursing at them, you can say kind things to these people. It happens. Believe it or not, people do this over the other. I love what Pete Scazzaro says in The Emotionally Healthy Leader. This is what he says. He says, when we look for goodness and beauty in one another, and when we speak honest words of life over one another, we become God with skin on for the other. He says this, affirmations heal wounds, they cover shame, and they communicate how God sees us, basically as infinitely valuable and lovable. Just looking at someone and liking them out loud. You like their hat? Great, say that. You like how whatever they sing? Great, say that thing. Just speak what you love and see and like about someone. Now, I'm not talking they just run up to random people and hit on them. That's something else. Don't do that. Guys, don't do that. That's not what I'm talking about, but just speaking words of life into people. We become God with skin on to people. The ability for you to walk up to somebody and encourage them so well that they were going to go home and cut themselves or kill themselves, and whatever you said brought them back to life and made them feel like they had worth. Do you understand that that's possible? That you could save someone's life by just speaking life into them and saying hey, actually, your worth is something that I notice and I see, and I want you to know that. You don't have to bring Jesus into it necessarily, but it's impossible because if he lives here, he's going to be there as well. But I'm just telling you, you just don't understand the little things that can ultimately transform somebody's day and maybe even transform their life long term. Saying kind things. Another way you can make someone's day is just acts of kindness. Acts of kindness. I love John Tyson. Y'all know this, but one of my favorite quotes about him is about the early church. He says about the early church, he goes, we know from the early church fathers that people were often confused about what these strange followers of Jesus were called. because the Greek word for Christ, Christos, is so similar to the word Christos, which means kind. Apparently, many people mistakenly, but perhaps fittingly, called Jesus' earliest followers not Christian, but the kind ones. I would love that to be true of Christians in our day. For the words not to pop up. What do you think of Christian? Judgmental, hypocritical, homophobic? Not that. What are they? They're the kind ones. I would love that to be the answer that people have when it's like, I don't know if I believe everything they believe. I think they believe somebody died and rose again. I'm not sure how I wind up on that. But I tell you what, they're the kindest people I've ever met. The kindest people. We're supposed to be kind. We're supposed to be the blessing to the nations. We're supposed to be light and salt to the world. Acts of kindness. Make someone's day. Make it, set it in your calendar, write it on your mirror. Go into the world and make someone's day. Jesus has made yours, and so we should rejoice and be glad in it. Go and make someone's day. Second thing, find a need and meet it. Again, super easy. Anybody can do this. Find a need, meet it. Some of you took the book study that we did over the summer, Creative Minority by John Tyson, because I love John Tyson. But one of the things he writes about is the Clapham sect, which was William Wilberforce. Some of you have heard this. He wrote the song. Everybody heard of the song Amazing Grace? Okay, yeah, he wrote that song. He's the one who wrote that. But thank you, love it. He had this group of people. They were called the Clapham sect. You can go to the next slide here. The Clapham sect. Basically, it was like this group of friends that got together and had shared values. I love that. It was like a group of friends, and they called themselves a sect, which I think is really cool. But what they did was they got together, and they were like, hey, we have some money. We have some influence. Let's start a bunch of things that meet random needs that we find in our community and around the world. And so that's what they did. They were like, what do you want? What are you interested in? And they're like, I'm kind of interested in this. Like, great, let's do that. What about you? What would you like to support? Well, the other day I was at the market, and this lady was talking about this, and our husband, da-da-da-da. Maybe we could do something with that. Awesome. Let's lock that in, too. What else you got? And they just found needs and started meeting them. And so just a couple here. They started the British and Foreign Bible Society, making Bibles available around the world for those who didn't have a translation. They were just like, hey, you know what? We don't have this in Uruguay. Like, we should get the Bible there. And they're like, okay. Like, they just started doing some of this stuff. Like, hey, we don't have one of these in Uganda. We don't have it. I don't know why both the things I used were you, but they don't want to have it there. Maybe we could get it there. And they're like, great, let's do that. Abolition and Anti-Slavery Society. They started 2 of those things to rid the world of slavery and the slave trade. Proclamation Society. It was just work to create safer and more moral places to live. So they started this society to look around their community and be like, they just threw a cigarette on the ground or something on the ground. Let's start a society that like monitors that. We're not police, but we're just kind of making our society cleaner and safer and all the rest of it. Let's make sure we do those things. We see windows that are busted out. Let's go fix those things so that the society in which we live looks more beautiful and looks more livable and all the rest of it. So they just started this thing to make their community beautiful. And again, what does that do? It reveals it's like, well, Jesus is beautiful, and so the place where we live, where the Christians are, should be beautiful as well. And they started blessing their community. The Proclamation Society. Sunday School Society, which isn't what you think, but it was basically education for children and making sure that could happen. The Bettering the Cause of the Poor Society. They just wanted to give a better way of life to those with lower income. Sometimes that did mean giving them money. Other times it just meant like taking care of their homes and their groceries and things like that, so that even though they're low income, they have a way of living. Small Debt Society to help people who are in prison over small debts. They were not criminals. They just had small debts they couldn't pay off because they got laid off of work or got hurt or something like that. And so they were like, who in your community is not a criminal that doesn't need to stay in prison? And who of them are just like, I just have a little bit of money that I can't pay off, and I'm away from my family and all the rest of it, but if I can get a job, I can pay it off. It's like, great, we'll pay off your debt. Jesus has paid off our debt. We'll pay off your debt. Finding the need and met it. The Society of Refuges, for the refuge of the destitute, which aim to help and provide for persons just discharged from prison. Can't get a job? We will help you find a job. And they just looked around. A group of friends got together and was like, what are the needs in our community? What are the needs among our other peers? What are the needs here? What can we do? And then they found a need and they met it. There's brokenness all around you in your schools, in your homes, in your community, in your neighborhood, wherever. There's brokenness. You are the people. You are the salt to the earth. You are the light to the world. Those are 2 that are open for everybody. The last 2, and then I have one more actually, but the last 2 are more specific, okay? Last 2 are more specific. How can you be salt and light to the world? Number 3 is figure out where God has uniquely placed you in order to bless those around you. God has put you in a place with your friend group, with your talents, with your stuff on your team, with all those different things, he has placed you in a certain spot in order to be a blessing to those places. Frederick Buechner, in his book, Wishful Thinking, says this. I love this quote. I heard this week, and it was just the best. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The space that gives you so much joy and fulfillment, and the world's deep hunger, and they're going, please, God, someone help. You have a space where you have deep gladness to meet a need that is desperate to be met. These two things that meet together, God has called you to that place. That's where he wants you. That's where he's placed you. You are salt and light, and it's not work you have to do to earn your salvation. It's just like you have something that you long to do, a need that you see. Where you want to meet that is exactly where I have you, because that's a need that needs to be met. Some of you have friends that would never step foot in a church. Who has a friend that would never step foot in a church? Great, lots of you. Some of you have friends that are gay and would never come to a church ever. They've been hurt by the church. They've been judged by the church. They've been outcast from the church or whatever. You have people in your life that have been kicked out of the church in some way or another. They never wind up here. You have the opportunity to show them that Jesus is not judgmental. Jesus is not condemning. Actually, in the ways that he came for us, he actually came to save sinners. He actually came for them directly. And you have the opportunity to love them in the way that Jesus still actively, currently loves them. You have a way to do that. They're not going to come here. They're not going to come here where the leaders in our ministry can love them. They're not going to come here where the pastor can tell them that, hey, Jesus loves you. They're not going to come here and do that. But you're in their midst. You are their friend. Your deep connection to them and their great need to experience the love of God, that's where you're at. And you have the opportunity to love them the way that Jesus loves them. And don't worry. People say this to me all the time. Well, if I love them, isn't that affirming their lifestyle? No. Jesus never would have loved us to death if he thought it would affirm our sin. Doesn't work that way. Jesus loved us to death to free us from our sin, not to affirm our sin. If you love them well, love them to the point of dying even, it doesn't affirm their lifestyle. It actually lets them to see the love of Jesus and ultimately free them from what they're walking in that's crushing them. Know that. You can love them freely and not have this random experience of wondering, like, what will people think? Jesus dealt with that his entire life. What will they think of Jesus if they don't condemn the woman who was caught in adultery? What will they think? And he's like, I don't care. I just love her and I don't condemn her. This is what you have the opportunity to do to the people that will never step foot in this place. Some of you have friends that are crippled by what other people think about them, and you just don't have that. Libby Gibson, where you at? Libby Gibson, she's exactly this. She just does not, I just love her, anyway, sorry to call you out, but just love her freedom and joy. Like, I just love it. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. You were just on my mind today when I wrote this. But I had this friend, like Libby, I had this friend in high school, and I wasn't like completely like crippled by what other people thought of me and stuff like that. But, you know, when you're in the car and you're driving, and then you get to a stoplight and you're like jamming to a song or whatever, and then you get to the stoplight and you're like, you look to your left and your right, and there are people there, and you're like, and then the song's still going, but you're like, hold it down. It's just a stoplight, you know. And then you start driving again. You're like, da, da, da. Like, but you stop for just 1 second. I don't know, anybody, okay, maybe it's just me. But I was, okay, thank you. You're like jamming, and then all of a sudden you get to the stoplight, and you're like, I will sing again in about 30 seconds. You know, because I don't want to do that with people to my right and left looking at me. And I had this friend named Josh. And he just, like, I remember the first time we were in his S10 Chevy, and we got to the stoplight, and we were singing Rascal Flatts or something like that, just killing it. He could sing really well, too. And just killing it. And then we get to the stoplight, and I do like any normal bro. I stop singing. And I just act like we weren't singing. You're singing. Well, you know, I do that. He does not stop. He's just, and people are looking, and notice what happened. I was like, bro, they're looking at us. They're looking at us. Look at us. And they started singing too, because he rolled down the windows. He was like, let's go. Everybody chime in. My wish for you. Like, Rascal Flatts? Okay. But it freed something in me. I was like, why am I worried about these people that I'll never see again? And he just did not have this thing to worry about what people thought, and it was lovely, and it was beautiful, and it led me into a freedom. Some of you have friends that are crippled with fear, and you just don't have whatever that is. And you're like, not me. Great. You have the opportunity to lead them into freedom, to go that your worth isn't based on what they think about you. Your worth is actually built on something completely different. It has nothing to do with you. You have the opportunity to show them a better way. Some of you have friends who hate themselves. They hide it on their social media. They post scandalous photos. They do all this stuff. They send scandalous texts because realistically, they don't love themselves. They hate themselves, and they're looking for affirmation. And you're friends with these girls, and you're friends with some of them, and you have the opportunity to actually love them well and to tell them, like, this is not where your worth comes from. This is not what you have to do. Your source of life and love that you can give them would encourage them to experience something greater. Some of you have friends whose home life is awful, and they act like everything is fine on the teams or whatever. This was me growing up. But inwardly, you know it's bad at home. And you have the opportunity to be a safe space where they can be vulnerable, where they can cry, where they can actually experience the safety of belonging, that like even if you break into tears and it's not going well, you can just scream and yell and be somebody who's real on the inside. You can do that here. I know you can't do it everywhere, but you can do that with me. You have the opportunity to provide safety for them the way that Jesus did. Some of you have friends who feel like their life will be over if they don't make the team, if they don't perform well, if they don't become popular or whatever. Some of you have friends that are super lonely. You have the opportunity to move into these spaces and to breathe life into those things. So figure out, where has he placed you directly? Where's your deep longing and the deep joy and gladness that you would experience in the longing of the world? Where do those two things connect? Fourth thing that's specific to you, figure out your spiritual gifts. If you're a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus, you have unique gifts given by God to you. If you go and read 1 Corinthians 12, you all should. All the gifts that are laid out. I have the gift of teaching. Sometimes I talk way too much, but I have the gift of teaching. And I know that about myself. It's not something I brag about. It's just like, it's like a gift I got for Christmas, it feels like. It's like I got a gift from Jesus. It's really nice. Some of you, if you read them, though, there's a lot of different gifts. Sorry, I teach and spit a bit. But sometimes if you read through those things, you see all these gifts and things like that. And one of them is the gift of healing. Like the Spirit gives to some the gift of healing. Some people have that and some people don't. I just love the idea that like there's people that are sick around you and stuff, and you have the spiritual gift of healing that you can actually walk up to, pray over them, and actually have them experience healing that the Spirit wants to give them. This is available to you. I think it's super cool. I was talking to Emma Stouffer last week, and she's at this new church where she's a youth pastor, and she was saying that one of the pastor's daughter has the gift of healing. And so they were just chatting because she's around 18, 19 years old. She's like your age. And Emma was talking to her, was like, yeah, she wasn't bragging or anything. She was like, yeah, I have this gift of healing, and I pray for people, and not all of them are healed, but many of them are, and that kind of stuff. And so she had this moment where Emma's watching this take place at the front of the church and this whole thing, and she was telling me this. I was like, this is great. This is a teenage girl, like, practicing her spiritual gift because she knows who she is. Figure out who you are. Figure out what your gift is and flex that so that for the kingdom of God, not for yourself, but flex that so that the kingdom is built up and so people can experience what Jesus is like. And the last one, pray for opportunities to bless other people. Pray for opportunities and open doors. Paul is constantly doing this. God, would you give me an open door for ministry, for gospel ministry here? And then he's asking other people, would you please pray for me that an open door would open up for the gospel? Every morning, if you're a follower of Jesus, please, and you'll do this in your small groups, pray for an opportunity to be salt and light to other people. This isn't something that is just for specific people. If you're a follower of Jesus, this is open to you. And I promise you, if you'll pray for an opportunity to do it, he will give you those things. I prayed for this on Monday, just testing the waters a little bit. And I went to this space, and this woman randomly was like, so what do you do? And I'm like, oh, man, here it is. I was like, well, I'm a pastor. And we had a great discussion about spiritual things, and I said the words. I was like, yeah, some pastors are real jerks. And she was like, can you say that? And I was like, sure, I'm a jerk sometimes, and I'm a pastor. Like, it's real. She was like, I feel like I'd have to go to confession for that. And I was like, I think Jesus understands that all of his people are imperfect. It was just a really good conversation. Pray for opportunities to do that. You say this. Say, I am salt. I am light. Great. We're not a cult, but that felt really good. All right. Let me pray. And then Hannah's going to come up. Father, would you please raise up a generation of students that understands this is who they are. You have called them by yourself and by your name. You have called them to be salt to the earth, light to the world, to move into the lives of their friendships and the people around them and their communities, and actually bring about life where there is death, and to give hope and joy and peace and love where there's anything but those things. God, would you help them to understand this is not something they have to try and earn to be. This is what you've made them. Would they step into their communities? Would you raise them up? Would they pray for opportunities, and would you give them plenty so that other people can experience what it's like to be around you and to know you? God, would you build a culture of blessing? Would you uniquely open the eyes of the students' hearts so that they can see, this is who I am, this is how I've been created, this is what he's given me, and this is how I can help people experience the love of Jesus in my time. Would you build that among us in Jesus' name? Amen. You guys stand, let's sing.